Guitarist Denis Taaffe. I'm in my home studio, and I'd like to take a look at the making of modern rock guitar, Vol.33, Origins. And this was, of course, my 33rd album, and it was recorded in 2006. And in 2006, it was actually my 18th album of 2006. And it's significant for several reasons, for me anyway. And we'll try to go through some of that here in going through the making of the album. Now, by this time, it was the 18th album of 2006 for me, and my 33rd album overall. And by this time, I was really, if you'd like to say, kind of on a roll. I think I did 76 albums that year. A few things had changed for me. One was that basically I started using samples at that time, and I found a nice balance between pre-recorded samples and doing my own music. Up until then, it was really kind of a novelty. And with this album, I really tried to incorporate it into the music itself. Eventually, it kind of got away from me, where I was really using too many samples, so eventually I stopped using them altogether. Because at some point you have to decide, do you want to do the music or do you want someone else to, and you just play the little files, However, for this album I had found a pretty nice balance. The other thing is that I also I found a good balance as far as using drum machines and drum loops as well. I still use some drum loops to this day. Drum loops are basically little files of real drums being played that you basically piece together as if it was a drum machine to create a drum track. Okay? And that was always the problem, is that back then, there was the Alesis, I think it was the SR16, is that right? I think so. And it was pretty good for a drum machine, but the drums weren't all that realistic. So using samples in that sense also helped me a great deal. Now, I really had a theme, I guess, for people who don't know about my style of music and so on. You have to understand that all the tracks on the album, and there are 10 of them, okay, and it's a pretty long album. It's about 73 minutes and 50 seconds. Okay, that's quite a long album. In fact, nowadays it would probably be a double album, just because of the length of it. Okay, and in any case, all of my album tracks are improvised on the spot with no overdubs, and just played and recorded live in the studio. So what you hear is basically what I created on the spot there. And the reason I do that, I use loops and those kinds of things. So it's basically, I suppose, if you had seen me play live somewhere and I had all my looping gear and so on, it's basically what you would hear is this kind of thing. However, I have to admit that I really don't use pre-recorded samples, except for drums, live. But live in the studio, it's a little easier, And basically what happens is I hear, a basic framework, and I work off of that, trying to add to it as much as possible. Okay, and basically I have certain themes when I create an album. Unlike today where, it's just a collection of songs, all of my albums, they have themes that would run throughout the different tracks. I would name them later, but they'd all be related, and hopefully the music as well. I tried not to steer the music away from the main themes that were found in the album, and sometimes they would develop a little later than when I was actually playing them, and I go back and go, oh, so that's the theme, and that's the direction, musical direction that it went in. And there's some quite exciting things, really, that happen that way, sometimes by accident, and so on. Now, this particular album, I had the idea of being inspired by the 70s TV series. Things like Kojak and Starsky and Hutch, these kind of 70s cop shows, against the mafia or the mob at the time. And at the time, Gotti, John Gotti, the Teflon Don, because nothing ever sticks, was in the news. And so that kind of inspired me as well. Made it more interesting that the kind of, that could be one angle towards this album. Okay, and so that would make sense then for all of these tracks, in fact. Okay, and I guess the first track is called The Family. Okay, remember I was talking about the 70s film themes, or TV series themes. So the family, of course, meaning, like the mob family. In any case, the first track was called The Family, and it had no guitar on it whatsoever. It was an introductory track, okay, that I just happened to come upon, and I had so much fun with these pre-recorded tracks, these samples, because one of them was an orchestra, and at the time I was working for Indiana University, and they have a music school with classical music playing on the radio all the time. I even took some classical guitar lessons and so on. So I'm familiar with classical music, but never thought of, trying to work something out myself. But using these pre-recorded samples, it was kind of fun to stitch together, what essentially would become this first track. So let's take a listen to that. And there's something very important about this track, and I'll tell you what it is here. But let's take a listen to it for a little bit here. So here I'm stitching it together. Added the drums as a separate track, and trying to create a little classical piece. Classical melody. So if you are used to, hearing, a rock guitar album, you're going, what is this? However, here's the thing to keep in mind, And when it was released on a CD, there are 10 tracks on the album. Usually the way it's done is that there's a 2-second gap of silence between tracks. And this goes for this album as well, for tracks 2 through 10. However, track 1, this album is made so that track 1 has no 2-second gap. It goes right into the second track. And the reason is, as you'll hear, the first track ends, right, with this, melody, expecting a climax, but instead, this is where the guitar comes in on the next track. And the next track is called Origins. Okay, so let's hear that. Let me fast forward a little bit. And we're going to hear track 1. Okay, here it is building. Okay. And now, track 2. Yeah. Rock guitar, right? So this is where Dennis comes in. Which, actually, I really like this track. And there's the swell guitar doing the guitar loops. So, and unfortunately, even if you download this album, unfortunately, they put in that 2-second gap, and it just kills everything. I mean, because then you're left with this, classical piece that goes da da, and no climax. And that doesn't make sense. So let's hear that one more time. Just very, track 1, building and building and building, going right into track 2. Whereas you're expecting, the whole thing has been classical music. Classical instruments are going to play the climax, but instead it's the rock guitar of track 2. Let's hear that again. Okay, so here it is, building, and now the guitar. Track 2. I tried to get as big of a guitar sound as I could. Yeah. Little guitar swells here. So this is called Origins. Pause it here. Now, I live in Bloomington, Indiana, and one of the big rock stars in town who lives in Bloomington is John Mellencamp, and his drummer is Kenny Aronoff. And what's interesting is at the end of this song, I was improvising, and I found this section near the end of the song, and to me, it really reminded me of Kenny Aronoff drum type pattern, and John Mellencamp, what you'd hear on the John Mellencamp song. So I put that in near the end of this track, and let's see if I can find it here. And this is still Origins. I think it's around here. Okay, yeah. Okay, right here. Right here. It's very funny. It really does sound like a Mellencamp and Kenny Aronoff riff. Kind of my nod to them. Right there. So if you ever wondered what it would sound like if I ever played it with John Mellencamp and Kenny Aronoff, it'd be like this. Anyway. And now, taking it to the end of the song, bringing back in the classical element from track 1. There we go. And now the big ending. So I'm really pleased with the way that came out, you know. And it was really just by accident that happened. It's just what I was hearing, you know. So I kind of tried to work that out as much as possible. All right, now let's move on to track 3, which is Gotti's Lincoln. You know, I saw in the news. I saw they were talking about John Gotti, and they showed some cars there, and one of them was a Lincoln. So I just called it John Gotti's Lincoln. Let's play a little bit of that. That's track 3. Yeah, I can just see, imagining the car cruising through the city streets, you know, and alleyways, making pickups and drop-offs and so on of packages. Who knows what's in them? So those are, again, guitar swells being looped to sound kind of like a keyboard. And then a combination of drum loops and drum machines to create the drum patterns. And there's some more loops, swells. It's a pretty long track, about 7 minutes. Alright, let's fast forward a bit. Clean guitar over the swell loops and so on. All right. Now track 4 is called The Players Club, and the Players Club is kind of I think a place to gamble, you know, kind of a casino. And I remember driving to Nashville, Tennessee, right, to go to the music capital of Nashville. And on the way, I would see these billboards, and it had Telly Savalas, you know, with his sucker. That you know, if you ever seen the old show Kojak, you know, it was Telly Savalas, and he always had a sucker that he would suck on. And it was a billboard for the Players Club, you know, and that he basically was a spokesman for. So that's why I called it that. So let's hear a little bit of that. That's track 4. Okay. Now notice I put in the classical, you know, intro. It sounds like the intro, but it goes in a totally different direction. So we'll keep playing it, and you'll see how it, rather than following the intro, it goes in a totally different direction musically. Okay. right there, that kind of sounds like the intro. And there it changes totally. And kind of imagine a casino, kind of a fun type place. You know, people are drinking, throwing dice, whatever the hell they're doing. So there we go. But you'll notice how the samples and the guitar kind of really intertwine pretty well. You know, I really was using those musical ideas and trying to weave them together. Fast forward a bit because it's about 6 minutes long. They're using clean delayed guitars. Trying to expand on that. What's funny is there is using a delays, and back then, you know, they weren't the guitar delays weren't MIDI together, so to get the timing right, you know, if you play the guitar, especially when you're improvising, you would have to hope that the guitar delay would be in time as well, and most of the time it wasn't, but close enough. Okay, let's move on to track 5. Now, track 5, surprisingly, is called Kojak, after this series, of course. But what's surprising about it is that this is a huge track. It's 19 minutes and 50 seconds long. It was a big improvisation, and probably has long guitar solos and those kinds of things. Let's take a listen to that. Okay, and now keep in mind, there's the guitar I'm playing. But notice that the drums are real laid back, kind of rhythmic-y, kind of almost jazzy. And the only thing that was samples was the thing that sounds like it's a kind of a keyboard. Like right there. And then I play guitar over that as well. And all the bass that you hear was actually me playing that on guitar and then dropping it an octave and looping it to make kind of a bass sound as well. Alright, since it's so long, let's fast forward to about 10 minutes in. Yeah, I figured. So here I am playing guitar, of course leads, playing a long solo, which I had lots of fun doing. Wasn't always very musical. There's a sweet picking, trying to play as fast as I could. You must remember this was, you must remember this was about 2007, and so, you know, guitar solos were all the rage. And the faster you played it, the better you were, you know. And very much taking an influence from David Gilmour, that kind of bluesy rock solo. So I was experimenting with that, and you'll definitely hear some Jimi Hendrix and feedback in there, and so on. This is more that David Gilmour-ish type solo. I'm sure there's some other stuff in there for it to be that long. Man, it's like a 20-minute guitar solo. What was I thinking? Alright, let's go to 16 minutes and put it in there. They're doing swells instead of guitar solo with some clean guitar. See, and as much as I like guitar solos, at the time, I was really starting to concentrate on how musical it was, and, well, most of the guitar solos weren't all that musical, on there. Okay, let's move on to track 6, Beat the Odds. Of course, a reference to the gambling. And it's another pretty long track. It's a 10-minute track. Let's take a listen to that. Now. Okay, and this is where I was experimenting with delayed guitar. And this was around the time that I had just gotten the Line 6 Pod XT Live. It was a pedal board with amp emulation and tons of effects and things. And so I started experimenting with that. And it's kind of what the stuff I do today, really, using a lot of delays and things. But this was kind of the beginnings of that. Very much more influenced by The Police, for example. Improvisations I could do over this kind of track. Well, let's fast forward a bit. Let's say to the 6-minute mark. Yeah. And you'll see that there I'm layering several delayed guitars, the delays coming from the Pod XT Live. And back then, as I said, they weren't linked via MIDI timing wise. So I was experimenting with different timings and those kinds of things. Okay, and now let's move on to track 7. And track 7 is called Take a Dirt Nap, which is a saying that I thought, mob guys would use. I don't know. Take a dirt nap. Alright, so let's hear that. Now, remember Before that, I had track 3, Gotti's Lincoln, where they're driving around, the city, and they're Lincoln, doing, picking up packages and so on. Okay, well, this is Take a Dirt Nap, where they're sending out, the mobster enforcer. So it's very similar, but notice by this time I've added a guitar part, kind of a distorted rhythm guitar part, and very much inspired by Jimi Hendrix style type playing. Let's hear that. Hear the ninth. If you listen closely, you'll hear the ninth chord coming out of one speaker each time. Let's hear that. And a whole bunch of layered guitar. There's got to be at least 3 or 4 swelled guitar layered parts. Alright, let's fast forward a bit. It's another long track, about 7 minutes 34 seconds. So we'll go to 4:56 here. There you go, you can hear the guitar rhythm part. With a guitar solo over it. Those were kind of AC/DC-ish type double stop riffs there. So you have to understand some of the reason why the tracks are so long. So it was a lot of fun to create rhythm tracks, play over them, and then come up with soloing ideas and so on, as if you were playing, with a big band, like an AC/DC or that kind of thing. Okay, let's move on to track 8. Okay, now track 8, as I recall, is called It's a Mob Hit. Uh-oh. You know what that means. It's a mob hit. And what you should notice on this track is, as I recall, I think this is the right one, if you listen to the drums, it's this drums where they're playing the toms and doing a roll on the toms. And this is very much how the title of Hawaii Five-0, which was a television series in the 70s, would start with this roll of the toms. And so that's what gave me that idea. So let's take a listen to that, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the drums doing the roll of the tom. Here we go. Ba-da-da-da-da. There we go. Kind of a Hawaii Five-0 type thing. And if they're in the Gotti Lincoln, they're starting to speed up. Following someone about to take them down. have to remember back then, in fact, even now, honestly, but back then, I'm not a drummer. So I have a vague idea of what I like to hear in drums, but I probably, as I said many times, I come up with drum parts no drummer or whatever really play. But I think this worked out quite well because they're different samples, like the Hawaii 5-0 drum roll is completely different than the beat, but I put them together and it seemed to work out pretty well. Let's fast forward a bit to said about the delays not being synced using MIDI. They didn't have that feature back then, so the delays weren't quite in time, and it's kind of frustrating for me because that's the effect I was trying to get to, which I can do now, but I mean, we're talking what, not quite 20 years later. I guess it took 20 years to come up with sync delayed times. In any case, but that's what I was trying to go for here. Again, experimenting very much because I had, as I said, just gotten that Pod XT Live from Line 6. So experimenting with sounds, what was possible, what wasn't. Okay, and now let's move on to this infamous track that I still remember to this day. And it's Huggy Bear's 5 and Dime, track 9. Huggy Bear's 5 and Dime. And it's a 10-minute track, it's a pretty long track. Now, the reason why it's called Huggy Bear's 5 and Dime is because back in the 70s, they had the show Starsky and Hutch. And it was, at the time, taken pretty seriously. It wasn't a joke, they were, this television series was serious. And unfortunately, they had an African-American who was streetwise and owned a club. And of course, Starsky and Hutch would always go in there and be welcomed, and offered drinks and so on, and would always get information from the streetwise, owner of the club, who was hip to the word on the street. And so I had that in mind because I had heard a sample, which I thought was a keyboard. And I thought the little melody was just so streetwise and jivey that I imagined a Huggy Bear, and I think that's what they called him in Starsky and Stripes. He had some kind of street name like that, Huggy Bears. So Huggy Bear's 5 and Dime. So let's take a listen to that, and you'll hear what I mean about that sample, which really inspired me. It's just, if I was English, I'd call it cheeky. Alright, let's take a listen to that. There it is. So I actually played guitar to that and came up with a bass line and so on. There's the rhythm. Very much kind of a Sly and the Family Stone, James Brown type rhythm. That kind of a back then rhythm and blues. tried to match the drums to that as well. I had a lot of fun doing that. That little, man, that just kills me every time, though. That little 70s riff, you know. Alright, but it's a 10-minute track, so let's fast forward to about 5 minutes, and so you can hear pretty much in which direction it went in. Oh yeah. Now I had to add the trumpets from the James Brown trumpets, but also the oh darn, what was the name of that group? From the Village People. That's right, the Village People. You know, pretty big in the 70s with go to the YMCA and so on. So I added that as well. You can hear some of that. Let's fast forward it again. As you can see, I wasn't exactly all that streetwise, not used to that kind of rhythm at all, you know. So I'm playing these crazy swelled guitar parts, trying to match that. You hear a little more of it. Yeah, you see, trying to get it to mesh together. So that was just kind of a fun track, just messing around, really. And that's what was a lot of fun, you know, because back then the audio samples were pretty new, you know, and to have access to, boy, I had a bunch of them, all kinds of different sounds. Okay, and now a closing track, which basically ended the album, and it's called Benny the Bookie. Very short track. Just to close out the album. I'm not sure what it is. It's probably similar to the intro track, I would think. I don't know. Let's see. There, yeah, it's actually closer to the Origins track. Very similar. So that's it for Volume 33, Origins. And what I can say about this album is that I was very pleased with the originality of it, in the sense of working in the samples with my playing. For the most part. I suppose the exception might be Huggy Bear's Five and Dime. I didn't quite have that rhythm down. But overall, keeping to that theme, you know, the several themes throughout the album, you know, like the Mob hits and so on, right? And Gotti's Lincoln and so on, and Kojak and Starsky and Hutch and so on. But the musical idea is there. And in particular, I really like the track 1 when it goes into track 2 without the spacing there. Because the chances of that happening again are pretty slim, and it was exciting, you know, at the time when I realized, oh, hey, wait a minute. Here's the build-up, you know, as if I had my own little orchestra to tell them what to play, and then it goes right into the second track. I also think a lot of the guitar sounds are really good. The swelled sound, the looping sounds are very good. I would say that really one of the sad parts of the album are when I would try to use the delayed guitar. One, as I said before, they weren't synced to MIDI. That wasn't an option at the time. And it was fairly new to me, you know, because I had just gotten that pedal board, so I was experimenting with the delay a little bit, but, you know, a lot of them were just the preset delays that were in the patches of the Line 6 that I would play on. You know, however, yeah, I'm very pleased with this. It was fun. It was a fun album to make, as I recall. I had a good time making it, and some of the samples were just silly, you know. But yeah, as I recall, I really enjoyed making that album. It was a lot of fun. I don't cringe too much when I hear it now, you know. It's not, I guess there's a few things, you know, especially the delayed guitar and my pretty pitiful performance on Huggy Bear's 5 and Dime. But it was all in good fun, I guess. So there you go. Alright. So that's the making of Modern Rock Guitar, Volume 33, Origins. Okay, see you next time. Bye.